Thanks so much for being here today. I'm Krista Sampson. I'm with Victor Sampson, and we are going through our new K through 2 books today. So I will hand it over to Victor and go from there.
Awesome. Yep. As Krista said, we're going to be kind of splitting presentation duties here today, so you'll get to hear a little bit from both of us. So with that, what we wanted to do today is a little bit is to share what's new with our brand new K books, focusing on kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. So we're really excited. Kristen and I got to write these together. And when we were working on these materials, we really kind of wanted to make sure that we did 10 things that we thought would be most useful for everybody as educators. So the first thing we wanted to do is we really wanted to make sure that children, whether they're in kindergarten, first grade, or second grade, all have an opportunity to do science and not just hear about science or watch somebody else do science, but we really wanted them to have an opportunity to do science. So when we put these books together, they're filled with investigations. And the idea behind this is that kids can get doing hands-on work, engaging in the practices of science from a very early grade. So we set this up so kindergarten's got 8 of these different investigations, and they're spread across physical, life, and earth. Same thing with first grade, and then same thing with second grade. Because these are all hands-on, we also put together kits. Each one of these books comes with either kits separate, or you can get kits for each of these books, investigations, or you can get a whole set that has all the kits that come with the books in there. So those materials are there to make it easier to find things because we think hands-on is so important. Number 2, we really wanted to make sure all the investigations were 3D. So it's not just an activity or focusing on concepts, but we really wanted to make sure that kids were using all 3 dimensions of science during these investigations. And the figure here on the screen gives you kind of a way to start thinking about what we mean when we say 3D. So the idea behind 3-dimensional is that there's these 3 elements of science. So there's the practices, what scientists do to figure things out, the disciplinary core ideas. These are the ideas that have explanatory power and are really useful in discipline. And then there's these cross-cutting concepts that you can use as a way or as a lens to figure out what to investigate. And if you kind of think of this diagram, a one-dimensional approach would be just focusing on one of those things, right? So students just learning ideas or just using conceptual frameworks would be one-dimensional. If you overlap some of those become 2-dimensional. But really what we're trying to shoot for is having students use all 3 of these at the same time to figure something out. So all of our investigations in these books are 100% 3-dimensional here. Also with that, what we wanted to make sure we do is that we are 100%, all these investigations are 100% aligned with the DCI's cross-cutting concepts and science and engineering practices found in the NGSS. We also wrote a whole set for Texas as well, and those are 100% aligned with the TEKS. And we feel that's a really important piece because now the TEKS have gone 3-dimensional, where they have practices, important concepts, and then they have recurring themes instead of cross-cutting concepts. So we wanted to make sure that these were targeted to those, and that's why we wrote 2 sets of those. So we talk about kind of alignment. What we did for each of these is we really looked at targeting each one of these performance expectations. So there's an investigation that targets each one of those. For example, here's one from second grade. And in that investigation, they're going to be specifically touching on and reading about and or listening to or hearing about the disciplinary core ideas and cross-cutting concepts. And then they will be engaging in not only the practice that has gone into the performance expectation, but multiple other practices because they're doing so many things to figure out that. So it's really a nice way to address a lot of different, not only a performance expectation or a standard, but all of the pieces that go into that standard. The next thing we really wanted to do is we know time's limited in K2. We know that student or teachers often only have 20 minutes a day to work on science. And so we wanted to think about, if we're having these kind of 3D investigations, how are we able to make sure that they're able to be split over multiple days and be able, when you're splitting those fit into those 20-minute kind of time blocks that seem to be about what teachers have time to work on. So the nice thing about our instructional model of ADI is you kind of have these 8 stages of activity, and within each of those stages you have different activities that go on. That's kind of represented in this graphic here, where you've got kind of the circular bubbles is a stage, and then the dots in there represent the activities that are go in there. But each of those blocks then take about 20 minutes of class time to do. So what becomes really handy for you as a teacher is you can think about this as, okay, on day 1, I'm going to do the task for my 20 minutes in science. And then day 2, we're going to work on ideas. On day 3, we'll work on plan. And you can move through this in a sequenced way where you're not having to cut out anything or miss time or have to squeeze things in. So we were really intentional when we built out the K through 2 materials to be able to fit within this constraint. The next big one is that we really want to make sure that all the 3D investigations give students a reason to develop their literacy skills. So we think science is a great opportunity for students to have a reason to read, write, speak, and listen. So it creates a authentic context for students to develop these skills that are so critical for them in K through 2. Chris, I was going to let you kind of talk through some of these different kinds of things here, kind of like what we've built into have the literacy piece as really prominent.
Yeah, so you'll see this one is showing a video and then a handout. And the video, that's from stage 2, the ideas stage. And so we're going through those core ideas, cross-cutting concepts, and they're talking about the left video are pushes and pulls, and it's actually a narrated video. So the teacher will show it up in the Learning Hub, and students can follow along while it's narrated. And those ideas, science and engineering practices, cross-cutting concepts are all in those videos. And then what you'll see on the right with classifying materials is this is a student handout, and my classifying materials is 2nd grade. So they're going to be writing or drawing a picture of what they're collecting, I believe, in that one. So that's kind of the idea behind some of these handouts and then the videos. And then you want me to talk over this one too?
Yep, please.
Oh, okay. So then my favorite part, being that I'm a former 2nd grade teacher, is that we incorporate a trade book or picture book into each of these investigations. And so what we're doing is we're actually going to wrap up the investigation before students write with a picture book. We're going to read that, and then we're actually going to have an anchor chart and something like Jane Goodall, which is nonfiction. We'd say, okay, what did we learn? What do we what do we know? And what have we learned that from this book that we didn't learn during our investigation? Same kind of thing. Mammal is an animal. If we have a fiction book, like in another one, we have Box of Text, which is a really cute book about engineering, then we're going to do what was fiction, what was nonfiction. And that really helps kind of bring those ideas together. And then it also, in our teacher notes, has different questions that you can ask as a teacher and example anchor charts, so that you have a roadmap for where you're going.
Fantastic. And one more for that.
All right. And then finally, like I talked about the report, we have students, this is a 2nd grade one. They are scaffolded along the way. So kindergarten's definitely looks a little different than this. But they have those sentence starters. Okay, in science I figured out. This is their individual report. And then I know this is correct because they can fill that in. And then below is a picture that shows, and they can show maybe their setup, evidence if they've gotten there. And then as a teacher, you're going to go ahead and review these with a rubric that we also have included in the book.
Fantastic.
Anything? Okay.
Now, the other big one, because of this, we have such a literacy focus, and we think science is such a great context to learn these. We've really tried to focus on aligning all these investigations with the ELA Common Core standards. For the NGSS books, for the Texas books, we use the TEKS as well. Now, we don't address 100% of the ELA standards because some of them don't make sense for science. So things like reading poetry or a narrative or something like that. But when you're thinking about informational text and writing, it's really well aligned. So here's some examples of that, right? So like this idea of key ideas and details from informational texts, and craft and structure, and then the production and distribution of writing, and then the collaboration and comprehension for speaking and listening. And when you start thinking about this, how many of these standards you have to focus on by having its own individual lesson during your ELA block, if you're doing these kinds of things that Krista was just sharing about with the literacy focus in the investigations, you're able to do this. So it not only reinforces what you're doing in ELA, but it also gives kids a good idea to see that that's an important part of doing science as well. We also wanted to really make sure, since we have such a literacy focus, that these investigations are really 100% aligned with the WIDA language acquisition standards for science. So if you think about where this is moving toward in terms of what kids who are learning English or using multiple languages, what they should be expected to do in these different grades. So here's a version of this for grade 2, it's actually 2 and 3, but you can kind of see these are the kinds of things that are being expected of multilingual students to be able to do inside a class of these grades. And these investigations provide a incredibly rich context to be able to do these things, where you're learning how to distinguish between evidence and opinions, or describe observations and or data about a phenomenon, right? So those are all built in there. For Texas, we've aligned these with the ELPS. I think I mentioned that here a second ago. The next thing, Krista kind of alluded to this, is in K through 2, students are just learning how to read, write, and speak and listen, right? So as they move up the grades, we really wanted to make the expectations for students increase by grade as their literacy skills developed. So here's kind of a quick representation of how we think about that. So across this table here are, across the top of this table are the different stages of ADI. And then on the left side is the grades, second, first, and kindergarten. And what we've tried to do is design these so thinking about who's the person responsible for keeping track of thinking. So when it's a teacher, it's usually done on an anchor chart. So you would bring all the students together, lead them through that stage, and make a record of what kids are thinking about on an anchor chart, so you have a shared representation. When it's a student, they're doing it on a handout in some way, right? So in kindergarten, you can see here, as students are just developing their literacy skills, it's the teacher that's really keeping a record of everybody's thinking through all of these stages, all the way into the report, which is we start working on printing of letters and those kinds of things for scaffolding, but we wanted them to have a chance to share their ideas. Then if you move up into first grade, you can see there's less on the teacher recording that. That's only in the ideas and the share and the reflect stage. And then finally in second grade, students are keeping track of all of the things as their literacy skills develop. So it's a really nice way to think about a progression as kids are moving through science and literacy over time. The next one, I'm going to have Krista talk about this one a little bit as well, or actually lead the discussion on this one, is that we wanted the investigations to be really easy for teachers to use. right? There's so many things that you go out there and look for, and you just don't even know how to use them. So we really wanted to make it as easy as possible for that. So I'll let Krista kind of talk through what that looks like in terms of our teacher lesson plans.
Yeah, so I know for me personally, science was not my background. I felt very comfortable teaching reading and math and writing, but really, science can be overwhelming. So having this broken down into, okay, here's an overview, here's what the investigation's about, what students are figuring out, and then a quick, you can see the overview of the stages and what students will do during those. On the next page, you see a standards alignment, and I can't remember if we have it on the next slide or not, but something that is also really helpful is that we have the science behind the phenomenon. Things to know, thank you. The science behind the phenomenon, and then common misconceptions as well listed, so that you feel really comfortable with diving into this. And then the materials and how do we set it up, and having a picture of that, and making sure that it's easy to find those materials. So if you would like to, you can just go ahead and find materials probably in your own classroom. From there, we have each of these stages broken down like we talked about before. So this is stage 1, and we're actually going to tell the teacher what they can say, questions they can ask to get students talking. And we've talked about anchor charts. So you'll see there at the bottom of the page, the task one in green, that actually gives ideas of what you can put on the anchor chart, and it tells you what you're looking for to kind of guide that conversation. There's also teaching tips along the way, just like in all of our books. And sorry, I'm just refreshing my memory. Yeah, and so that, oh, sorry, I wanted to also speak about that the beginning of it, there's a phenomenon video. So we have at the very beginning, students watching a video of a phenomenon. So in this one, it's classifying materials, and they're watching ice cream melt in the sun, and then talking about, okay, so what did we notice? What did we wonder? And those are those handouts that you can see.
And then what's also pretty cool about not only that is we, with the books, we supply we call it the book module in the Learning Hub. And so teachers can access all the investigations that are included in that book. And when they go into that, then they can look at these. So here's an example of classifying materials, and they can download the handouts. And most importantly, they can use what's called the presentation mode. And when you hit on the presentation mode, then it allows you to display what shows on the handouts, and includes all the videos that are in there for you. In this case, this is one about Hurricane Harvey, just as an example, but this ends up being on your smartboard or on a screen or however you want to do that. And then you can kind of talk through and guide students through that. And then all the embedded media is right there for them. So once again, really trying to make this as easy as possible for teachers to do this kind of these kind of cool investigations that we're really proud of. And then I think the last and most important thing that we really wanted to make sure we're doing this book is to make sure that district schools and teachers have choice about when and how to use the investigation. Quite often when you adopt a curriculum, it's pretty lockstep in terms of we must do this way, and this way. That makes it really tough for districts and schools to customize, right? And it also makes it tough to, well, what if one of these lessons is not really a great one, or we don't really like this, or we would like to take this in a different direction. So we really think about these materials as a way to give everybody more choice and more flexibility of how do you either tailor your curriculum or fill in the gaps that your existing curriculum just is kind of missing on that. Chris, did you have any more on that piece?
No, I think since we're almost out of time, we should probably start asking for questions.
Fantastic. So remember for questions here, hopefully if anything came up during this, feel free to throw that in the Q&A section. You can just click on that button and type that in, and then we'll look over that. Or on your screen, you can just raise your hand and we can call on you on that. But we wanted to make sure we give you a chance to ask any questions you have, and so we can clarify things.
No, we do have a question. Okay. So could you tell us a little more about using the anchor charts and how, because I know that that's different than what we would do grades 3 through 12.
Yeah. So usually when you're thinking about the older grades, students are trying to keep a record of what they are thinking is important or valuable on the handouts, right? So like if you're thinking about the ideas stage in the older grades, when some text is written, we're really focusing on students trying to figure out what ideas from the text are going to be most helpful or useful for figuring things out. Now that requires a skill of reading comprehension that the younger children have not developed yet. So what we try to do with the anchor chart is encourage kids to start sharing their ideas and then helping the teacher kind of guide those into kind of a class consensus view of what are the kind of the most useful ideas. That way, as kids add in things, they can contribute pieces of the puzzle, and then the teacher can kind of pull it together. And then once you have those anchor charts on that, if I keep a record on that, that can go up on the wall and you can come back and revisit that numerous times, remind kids that these are the important ideas that we've been talking about. Remember how we touched on this earlier, we should talk about this again. It's a great way for teachers to kind of corral all of these different ideas into a kind of a class consensus that students can then rely on.
Awesome. Sabrina has a question. Do the students have a workbook, or do the teachers have a binder or sheets to duplicate for the students? Can you kind of talk about student handouts?
Sure, no problem. So one of the nice things we've got basically answered that is yes and yes. So on the first side of that, when the book module of the Learning Hub, there was those two buttons that had the presentation mode, which I showed you, but there's also the handouts. So we include all of the handouts that students would need as downloads. So they just click the button, download the computer or their computer, and then they can print them out and then make photocopies. Now, depending on, that's one way that you can have those materials in the hands of students. Another way, we have put together student workbooks as well, which is just not all the teacher notes, but just the student handouts all put together into a single book that has removable pages. So that way you can get one of those for each student, and then they can work through it throughout the entire year. So we've tried to be think through as many as different options as we possibly can to make it easier for whatever works in your school district.
Awesome. And a question from Tara. Do the dots on the block showing the stages represent anything about the stages, like 1 dot, 2 dots?
Yeah, so those, it's always funny trying to come up with good graphics to explain complex things. So within each of those stages, there's usually multiple activities that we try to divvy up. So when we showed you the examples of the teacher notes, those little dots are what we end up blocking. So it'd be stage 1, activity A, stage 1, activity B, stage 1, activity C. And so since it has 3 activities, then we would put 3 dots in there just as a way to kind of remind you that there's multiple things going on during each of those stages. Sometimes it's only 1 activity. Sometimes it's three, but we try to divide all the teacher notes by that so as well. So it's really easy to kind of go through and say, where am I moving to? Where am I at? Where are the natural stopping points? Kind of thing. Big things on this. So what we want to do with this one is just kind of give a big overview of what we were hoping to do when we wrote these books. Kind of what they include, what's going on in them, why they're written the way they are. On our next webinar for the K through 2, we want to really dive into one. So what we're going to do is go through an entire investigation from start to finish and show you what the handouts look like, what the videos look like, all of the pieces. So what we're going to do is we're going to break these up into 3 different sessions on Monday the 14th. So at 4 to 4:30, we're going to do a kindergarten investigation, so you can see what that looks like. That starts at 4 to 4:30. At 4:30 to 5, then we will switch over and do a first grade investigation. And then once again, from 5 to 5:30, we'll do a second grade example, so you can kind of walk through. So I think this is a great time if you know anybody that's interested in maybe what this would look like. It's a great chance to actually see. Okay, this is at the handouts. This is what you say. This is what the video would look like. All those pieces. So it's a pretty useful deep dive on that one, and that's again on the 14th.
Awesome. And one more question just came through. Do the kits have all the materials for the experiments? If so, they're refillable at the end of the year. Yes, they do have all of the materials, and yes, you can get them refilled. So we have your initial kit. If you want to get all of them for the book, you can do that. And then you can get the consumables at the end of the year if you need anything to fill it. We have that as well. Awesome. And I think that's all for questions. So thank you so much for joining us, and love talking about our K through 2 materials. Super excited about them. And if you're interested in the other books, 3rd, 4th, and 5th is tomorrow evening. Thanks all.
Thank you all.